Hello there, this is Yana Smakula for Wplus9 and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'll share a closer look at some of the new stamp sets coming to Wplus9 October 5th, 2016. I'll mostly be working with the new Holiday Houses stamp set and coordinating dies, and I'll share several examples of how these houses can be used to create simple, yet beautiful Christmas cards. So let's get started. Personally, I adore stamp sets like this Holiday Houses one. When I was little, I happened to love Lego building blocks. So to me, stamp sets like this one is like a new set of Lego bricks. I can play and build and make anything I want out of these pieces. So there are 4 houses included in here, a 2-story house, a church, and some smaller ones too, so a great assortment. You also have several trees, a few groupings and an individual tree, and also there are a few snowballs. So plenty of little bits and pieces to mix and match and create unique projects every time. I love to create multiple projects in one sitting, so this is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to make 4 different cards using these stamps. They will all be similar and can be used as a set. For example, if you like to gift card sets, this will make a great example of a simple to make card set. But also, these cards will be slightly different at the same time. I'm making more than one card here to show you different layout options or layout ideas. With these little houses, there are many different ways how you can position them on a card for a unique and interesting look. Since I'll be making several projects, I'm going to stamp multiples of each image, and I encourage you to do the same. I know I will be watercoloring these houses, so I'm stamping them onto watercolor paper, and I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is a rich pigment ink, and I find it works better for stamping onto watercolor paper when there's some texture, and there's a little bit of texture on this particular paper here. I'm going to use Distress inks to watercolor these images, and I'm using the same technique I shared in one of my previous videos. A messy watercolor technique where I'm leaving a little bit of white space in my images, and don't worry about having perfectly colored pieces. I decided to use 5 colors to have a good variety of houses on my card, and I went with Wild Honey, Burnt Lipstick, Cracked Pistachio, Mermaid Lagoon, and Wilted Violet. I would suggest using at least 3 different colors unless you're going for a monochromatic look. Now there are many different ways you can color these images. You can use alcohol-based markers, and I will use red and green markers on some of these houses here to color the wreath hanging on the doors and the windows. You can also heat emboss these houses in, say, white embossing powder and blend ink over them for a nice graduating color. Wplus9 inks would work great for blending. Because this video is not about the coloring, I am not going to focus on this part much. I didn't color the roof of my houses as I knew I'd be adding some snow by using glitter glue, and I also left all the windows and the doors white. I like my houses just like that, with some pretty colors on the walls. There are coordinating dies available for all of these images, and I've used them here to cut the houses, trees, and the snow out. I have a bunch of pretty die cuts that I can't wait to put onto cards. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to show you a few layout ideas for your cards using these stamped images. The first one is to create hills or slopes and place a few houses onto these hills, imitating a neighborhood. What I'm doing here is just sketching hills onto a piece of printer paper. I'm going to use my scissors and will cut those out to use as masks. You can also use dies if you have dies for this, and simply cut those out of paper or maybe even masking paper. I've already created an A2 top folding card base, and I've used Wplus9 Dove Gray cardstock. I'll be using it for all of my projects today, and I'm going to place my mask one at a time and will blend white ink onto the card base to imitate snow. Now, this is a very light gray card base, so this white ink will not show much on the card, but it will be visible in real life. Notice how I'm adding ink here. I'm not blending it, but I'm pouncing it onto the card for the most part. And when I remove the mask, you can clearly see the 2 white hills blended onto my card base. I'm going to arrange a few houses here. We'll add some trees and some snow, and will adhere all of these onto the card base. I used regular adhesive as well as foam adhesive to pop some of the elements up and add dimension to my card. To create a sentiment, I'm using Be Merry Sentiments stamp set. I've already die cut a banner using a coordinating die. I'm not using a stamp that goes with the die, just the die on its own, and I'm going to blend tumbled glass distress ink onto my die cut and add a little bit of color. By having the die placed over the die cut, I'm protecting a tiny white border around my ink blending, and I'm making this piece pop. To finish my sentiment, I stamped Be Merry using black ink. I trimmed the right end of the banner and foam mounted it onto my card. So this was idea number 1. For idea number 2, I cut another hail out of paper. This time I cut it out of my good white cardstock. I stamped Christmas Wishes sentiment, and now I'm foam mounting it onto an A2 top folding card base. Now I didn't have a die to cut this hill out, so I just traced a plate and cut the hill out using my scissors. Once I foam mounted it onto the card, I added several houses. I went with a 2-story yellow one, a blue house, and a green church. I added some trees and snow, and that finished the second card idea. Very simple and easy to mass produce. And by the way, I added a double layer of foam adhesive to the yellow house to pop it up even more on my card. Let's move on to idea number 3. Once again, I have a dove gray A2 top folding card base. I've placed it in my MISTI, and I have a beautiful sentiment from the Be Merry stamp set. This is also a new set. And I'm going to stamp this sentiment in black ink directly onto the card. I've placed a house and a few trees to make sure I have enough room in my card for all of these elements. I foam mounted the house along with the trees for a pop of dimension, and I also stamped the sentiment, the bottom banner part, one more time onto watercolor paper, the same paper I used for my houses and trees. I wanted to add another pop of blue onto this card to go along with the house, so I grabbed my water brush and watercolored the banner using the same color of ink I watercolored the house with. There's a coordinating die for this banner, so I used it to cut this piece out and foam mount it and onto my card for that much needed pop of blue. The last card idea, or card layout, is the most time-consuming one. Here, I've placed a number of houses to cover the entire front of the card to create the illusion of a busy city. I started adhering my houses down from the top row. I used regular tape adhesive for the top row, so I did not add any dimension there. My second row was foam mounted using thin adhesive. These thin adhesive squares are about half as dimensional as regular foam adhesive ones, and work great when you want to have different height on your project. Row number 3 was foam mounted using regular thickness foam adhesive, and finally row number 4, the houses were foam mounted using double thickness of foam adhesive. I doubled up on foam adhesive squares when I foam mounted them. For the trees and snow, I used just one layer of foam adhesive here. To add a sentiment to this card, I heat embossed a banner and also Be Merry using white embossing powder onto a dove gray cardstock. I cut it out using a coordinating die and foam mounted onto my card. You might have noticed that some of my houses had a bit of glitter on the roof. With small images like these, little details are important. I used Stickles glitter glue and added beautiful shimmery snow to each of my houses. I also used a white gel pen and drew in little colored lights. They ended up being white for the most part, as if they were covered in snow. And on some of my houses, I also used Copic markers and colored the wreath and bows. I hope this video has given you a few ideas as to how you can use one stamped element differently or in different layouts on multiple projects. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check out Wplus9 for more creative inspiration. See you next time. Bye!